Hi there, this is Justin Andrew Zuniga and I'm with Z Elements. Today I wanted to do something a little special, a little different. I've been doing a lot of edits for South Texas Comic Con. If you look over here at my bridge, my Adobe Bridge, this is one of my Comic Con folders, one of three that has about 400 pictures in it. No, it has 642 images in this folder. And I've been doing a lot of edits. So what that means for people who are not familiar, edits is a term that I've heard a lot of people kind of toss around when referring to cosplay stuff, and it's specifically related to cosplay photography. So basically you are taking a photograph of a cosplayer and you're editing in such a way that that cosplayer looks like they're in a different environment, or maybe, you know, if it's a video game, they're kind of in the video game or something like that. Maybe taking a couple people together and compositing them so they look like a group or anything of that nature. It's just photo manipulation. And photographers manipulate photos all the time, of course, but this is a little different because you're trying to make a piece of digital art, especially because a lot of these characters exist in a sci-fi or a fantasy realm. So while you can go on location and maybe get a really cool like mountain or some kind of temple or something like that, you know, it might not be feasible to travel to a place like that just to take photos. So you can achieve the same effect, or maybe it's a place that doesn't even exist. You can achieve the same effect by using Photoshop and kind of placing that person in there. Now, the person, the cosplay that I have highlighted here is a friend of mine, Jaime Flores, who I've met through doing these kind of events, doing photography. I met him at a J&V Collectors Expo, and he stopped by the booth a couple times over the weekend, and he is cosplaying Marka Ragnos, Sith Lord. And I have to admit, I was not familiar with the character. I knew he was from Star Wars, but I didn't know exactly anything about his background. I looked him up and, you know, found out that he's from the extended universe, from the comics, a Sith Lord from many, many years before the Old Republic. So I got to see some reference material, which is really good if you're not familiar with the character. A lot of people who have been asking or are probably wondering if they're going to get an edit. One thing that you can do if you really want one, rather than just saying, oh, I want one, is tagging yourself, for one, so that way once it's posted, you know, if you didn't tag yourself in any of the photos, there's going to be no way I can tag you if I don't know you personally. But also making sure that at least one of those photos, maybe in a comment, has who the character is. Don't take for granted that we know everybody. I'm pretty geeky, but when you get into some of that, deeper anime, I might not know all the characters, or maybe you did a special take on it or a gender bent, and so it might not be completely 100% apparent who you are to us. You know, fans might know who you are, but we don't watch every anime or every comic book, and we might not know what character you are. And so we're probably a little more hesitant to do the ones that we're not sure of, because we can't go research and see what the character, you know, looks like in comic books or the anime or the movie or whatever. It's very helpful to go and look at what they're supposed to look like if you've done a special take, so that way we can make sure that the environment matches. So if you're really wanting one and you're wondering why we haven't done it, that might be one reason. Maybe you haven't tagged yourself, and so I don't exactly know who you are. I might know who you are as a person, but if you came in a cosplay that had a mask, I might not make that relationship to what you look like, without cosplay on. And then second to that, I might not know exactly who your character is supposed to be, just because I'm not familiar with that content, and therefore I might be a little hesitant to put that together. So I've been in talks with him. I wanted to make sure that it was okay I would do this video using his photo, and he said it was fine. So that's when I got the exact name of who he was cosplaying as, and I was able to look it up. That's very important. If you don't know who the character is, to do a little research beforehand so you can kind of get an idea. The biggest and most important thing if you want to start getting into edits, and that's what this video is about, it's about teaching you how to take your first steps into making your own edits, is just knowing the character really well. If it's your own character, if it's something you've cosplayed yourself, well, you should know that. But if you're doing it for another person, you know, make sure you do your research. Make sure you understand it, exactly the context that they belong in. Because if you don't, people will criticize you. Hey, that's, he doesn't belong in a forest environment. He's never been anything like that. Or if it's a cartoony type character and you're not aware of that because you're looking at a real person cosplaying it, you might put them in a real environment and that might not fit the fact that they're in more of a cartoon world, and it might not really reflect what it should probably look like. Of course, this is art, so it's all open to interpretation, but the closer you can get to the source material, usually the better the edit will come out. So if you're watching this video, you might just be interested in what we do or how we do it, but maybe you want to start doing this for yourself. So what do you need? The first and most important thing that you're going to need are high-res photos. The subject that you're going to do the photo edit, you need, of course, pictures, possibly multiple poses. This particular one is from the booth, and so it's very evenly lit, and it's on a neutral background. It doesn't have to be a green screen, it doesn't have to be a blue screen, but it's best if there's a lot of contrast. So, for example, if I look down here, let me see, this baby Ray one here, she has a very light colored outfit on, and it's a white background. Yeah, this is nothing against a cosplay, it's just the reality of the situation. So this would be a little harder because her costume actually kind of matches the background. Now there's some things that you can do to fix that, but we're not going to be working on this one today. So if you're planning ahead and you're going to take the photos yourself, you're going to want to try to do it on a neutral background, and you're going to want to make sure there's enough contrast between the costume and the background, because that'll make cutting them out a lot easier, because that's what we want to do. We want to cut out the figure and then place them on a different background. So had I planned this to do edits with this particular person, this little girl, I would have made sure to use maybe a dark background, either a green screen or a black screen, so she would stand out more. We're lucky in this one in that he's very dark, with the cloak and everything, and it's a white background, so he's going to cut out really nicely. You can make edits from people in a regular environment, like maybe they're out in a forest, or they're out, not that we have a lot of forests, maybe out in the monte, out at the beach, and then Photoshop them in there. But if you want to completely cut them out, that usually makes it more difficult, because there's going to be different colors behind them, different shapes, and it might be hard to kind of get their figure cut out. Usually, most of the time, if they're already on a real life background and it's not neutral, it's not like just a blank wall or something like that, you're going to find yourself having to meticulously cut them out by hand, which takes a lot of time. Not impossible, but it takes a lot of time. If there's any kind of focus where they're in focus and the background's a little out of focus, you're going to have a hard time defining that line between them and the background, and you're going to get this kind of fuzzy division, and they'll stand out from the whatever environment you put them in a little more, and it won't look as good. First of all, like I said, it's going to be a lot harder, and it's not going to look as good if they're already on a background that's like a real life background. I've had people send me photos of them in front of very complex, like in a street or in front of a tree or something like that, and say, can you edit this? And I'm usually like, hey, why don't you come by the booth? It'll be a lot easier. Just bring the same cosplay, come by one of the JV Collectors Expo, or here at South Texas Comic Con. Come by with that, so we can get you a photo on the neutral background and have a lot easier time making an edit of you. So if you're going to plan out the whole thing, not everybody has a backdrop to be able to do something like this, but you can at least shoot on a blank wall, because you could easily get a photo like this where it's kind of like a close-up view. That could have just been a nice wall behind him. It doesn't necessarily need to be a backdrop. And there's actually portable backdrops you can buy for like $30 that just have a green and a blue screen, or a white and a black screen, and you can invest in something like that. And then the next most important thing is, of course, the lighting. Photo quality is huge. These are raw photos straight from the camera. They're very, very large. You don't need to necessarily shoot raw or get a raw photo, but say, for example, you have a photographer take your picture. That might be something that you want to ask them for, the raw photo. What is it? What is a raw photo? Well, a raw photo, if you look at this file type, it's CR2. That's what my camera shoots as raw. And it's a photo that has a lot more information than when you shoot with a normal camera and just take a JPEG. A JPEG is a compressed file, and this one contains a lot more information. We'll look at that in a little bit, but first I want to talk about software. So the first thing you need are photos, high quality photos of the person. You'll also need high quality photos of whatever you want to superimpose them on top of. So I looked at him. He's an older Sith. I kind of saw a lot of photos of like temples and stuff like that, so I thought it'd be kind of cool to kind of, even though I don't know the state of that planet at the time he was alive, kind of recreate Mustafar from Revenge of the Sith, where that place where Anakin was, but maybe there's no technology on it. There's not those robots and facilities. Maybe it's older when it was just, you know, just the aliens that lived there or whatever. I'm not sure. But I did like all the lava and the heat and stuff like that. So I wanted to try to put him maybe with like part of a broken temple, you know, on one side, and then exploding lava on the other side, and space behind him, and then he's standing on a rock. That's the vision that I have. One thing you'll notice too, or you'll see too, is I'm going to kind of try things out. A lot of times you might have a particular vision in your head, and it might not come out exactly the way that you want. So you can try things, kind of see how they look, rearrange them, and then maybe swap out some elements to make it look good. But the most important thing is that you have high quality large images. The same thing with the background photos. Let me go to my folder here that has all my background photos. So for example, this is the temple, which is an image I've actually used before. This is all stock photography. It's very important to me that I use photos that are royalty free, so if the cosplayer decides they want to sell prints from that, they wouldn't get in any trouble for doing that. So I'm going to end up cutting some of this stuff out here, but it's a very, very large photo. Let's see if I can zoom in here. There we go. I would be able to use it at different zoom levels. So if I needed to be closer, I could. If I needed to be farther away, I could. If it's a low-res photo, you're not going to be able to do that. You get in too close, it's going to get pixelated. You're going to see all, and if I get really close, you can kind of see it, where it kind of gets these little artifacts, and the image is not as clear and sharp. So you want the highest resolution possible of all the images you're going to use. Like I said, you can do it with lower resolution, but it's not going to look as good. So that's talking about the photos that you need, which is the most important part. Now let's talk about the software. So I'm going to be using Adobe products. I have Bridge open, which is where I usually manage all my photos from. But then we'll do the actual work in Adobe Photoshop, specifically CS6. I have a subscription for the Creative Cloud. One thing to note that is if you're a student in college, you can usually get a subscription, or maybe even just the software, at a discounted price usually. It just depends on the agreement your institution has with Adobe, if they have one at all. And because the software can be very expensive, you know, hundreds of dollars, and a subscription can be anywhere from, you know, $25, $30 a month to $50, depending on what kind of license you have to buy. But other things you can do too is maybe you might know someone that has the software. You can say, hey, can I come by and use your computer for a few hours and do some stuff? Or if you do go to a school, like I mentioned, usually if they have any kind of graphics program in the school, they'll usually have at least a few computers that have Photoshop installed on them. And so maybe you can go to that lab manager and be like, hey, is there a time where it's kind of slow, where there's not classes coming in, that I could use this particular lab and use that Photoshop software? That's one option. If you don't have access to any of that and you cannot afford Photoshop, there is another piece of software called GIMP that is very similar to Photoshop. Now I'll show you the basic principles that you'll need to do photo manipulation, but as far as how to get to certain parts, you would have to look it up. So if I'm using transfer methods to kind of layer stuff in different ways, you'll have to look up how to do that in GIMP, because it'll be a little different from Photoshop if that's the route that you go. But GIMP is free software. I've used it before. It's a long time ago, so I'm sure a lot has changed, but it's perfectly capable of doing a lot of this stuff that we're going to do. There's also a cheaper version of Photoshop called Photoshop Elements, which is usually Elements like us, which is usually around $99, I think. I haven't looked at it in a long time, but it can do a lot of the stuff we're going to do here. Not all of it, but most of the stuff. You know, a lot of people have asked me too about using built-in programs like Paint. Sorry that I laughed. I shouldn't laugh. it's completely possible, but you're kind of taking on a different way of photo manipulation. If it's something that you can just kind of paint on top of, it's going to be a lot harder to layer elements on top of each other. The most important thing is whatever software that you get, because there's a lot of different kinds out there that I haven't even talked about. The most important thing is having the ability to layer things on top of each other. If you're not familiar with Photoshop or any photo manipulation software, that is a key piece. That you can take this character and you can layer stuff on top of them and then do different things with those layers, move those layers around. You can even color them differently. That's vital to be able to do these types of photos, these types of edits that I usually end up doing. So just something to keep in mind. Just look for software that's able to have layers of some sort. It's going to make your life a lot easier. Otherwise, you're just painting on top of the photo, which is a completely different type of art and beautiful in all of its own. But the problem is that once you paint on top of an image, you might save a copy of it. If you get too far and you don't create a copy, what's going to happen is you can't go back and undo some of the stuff that you've done. With layers, you can turn stuff on, turn stuff off, and easily go back and forth in your history and undo things that you've done just like that. So those are the most important things. So photos and the software, those are all the things that you need. Then you need a little creativity. Everybody has that. That's something that I think everybody has, no matter who you are, no matter if you're an artist or not. Everyone has creativity. Like I said, if you don't have a good idea of what you're going to do, look up reference images for that character and it'll give you some ideas. Maybe you'll see some posters or some screen captures or something like that that will give you an idea of what to do. One thing to note again on the high resolution photos, try to avoid using screen captures of a movie or anime or something like that, because usually they're not high enough resolution to compete with the resolution of the photo that you're going to use if it's straight out of a camera, for example. And secondly, there might be copyright laws prohibiting you from using that content. This is based in the Star Wars universe, but it's a very obscure character and it's its own take. So in a lot of ways, this is a really good photo to use because it kind of escapes a lot of those copyright issues. And we're not going to use anything from the movies or the comic books in here. It's all going to be images that are royalty free. So that's just a really good thing to do, just so you don't ever get in trouble. Let's get to the meat of photo manipulation. I have my Photoshop here. I have my bridge. If you have a raw image and you click on it, double click, what's going to happen is it's actually opening it up in Photoshop, and you get this cool window that allows you to change settings. Now, if you take a JPEG, you're not going to get all this extra stuff. And what it allows you to do is actually do a little manipulation prior to opening the photo in Photoshop. So if, for example, this was my this was not the default settings, it already has some stuff messed around with. Say the exposure was at what I shot it at, which is usually around here in the middle, right? Put it at 0. This is how the exposure was when I shot it. So it's a little darker. He came a little later in the day, and you can kind of see some of the footprints that were starting to accumulate on the backdrop. And he's a little too dark. You can't see some of it's just like a big shape. So I kind of upped the exposure here to about right there, so you could see more of his figure. And as you up the exposure on a white background like this, some of those footprints start to disappear. So you can do any of your image correction right now before you open the photo. It's very important that any image correction you're going to do, as far as color correction or anything like that, that you do prior to starting to work with a photo, because it's a lot harder to come back and do that after you started cutting it out and all that kind of stuff. So everything else here is fine. I'm going to actually open the image, and it opens up here in Photoshop. Now there's one last thing that I wanted to do that I usually do with people. He's got some contacts on. Let's see if we can actually, sometimes this does something and sometimes it doesn't, but they're kind of yellowish. And usually what I'll do is I'll take this burn tool, which is this little pin here. I always have it set to highlights, and if it's anybody with colored eyes, colored contacts or something, try to get it almost to the shape of it. So I'm going to this is what I'm doing is I'm manipulating the brush here, and I'll just kind of go over it a little bit, and what happens is it brings out the highlight colors, and it's very subtle, but his eyes are getting slightly more yellow and glowy, kind of like that classic Sith yellow eyes, and so they'll stand out a little more. People with naturally blue or green eyes, if you do that, they just kind of, especially blue eyes, they just become piercing and just kind of really stand out. People with brown eyes or dark eyes, it doesn't do much. It'll bring out the little shinies in their eyes, but it won't do much unless they have like really light brown eyes. Other than that, it's not going to do much. So anything with colored eyes, I usually do that. It's very hard to tell, but if I step back and I step forward, there's a very slight breaking out of the eyes, and that's pretty much the only manipulation that I'm going to do as far as coloring on this photo. I'm ready to get right to the cutting out process. This is the most vital part of creating an edit, is getting them out of whatever background they were and putting them into a different background. Sometimes you can just take a photo shot in the real world, and maybe, if they're in a kind of foresty area, cut that foresty area out and then put them, kind of zoom out a little bit and put them in front of a big castle or something. The problem with that is that, when you start getting into trees, there's individual leaves. It might be really hard to kind of get that tree out of there or something like that. So this is the easiest way to put them in a fantasy type background, for example. So it's the most vital part, and it can be the most difficult. We're very lucky in that he has very dark elements, so they should key out from the light background pretty easily. One thing that will not key out very well is a lightsaber. Is probably going to be hard to select. I don't need that, because I'm going to replace this lightsaber blade with one that I draw in and has the actual red coloring over it that will look like it's glowing. So I don't really need to select that. I need to select the lightsaber, but not, the hilt, but not the actual blade, because I'm going to replace that anyway. So just something to bear in mind. So the tool that I usually use, you have a lot of different selection tools, and this is what I was talking about, that if it's on a real life background, if there was stuff behind him, this is a lasso. I think this is the polygonal lasso tool, and this one you could use that one or the magnetic one to actually select him out of the background. This works really good because it usually tries to detect the edge. You see how it's detecting the edges of his fingers, but it kind of messed up right there. And then you close that off. I'm just going to close that off. So that creates a selection that would separate him from the background, but it's a little more tedious. Okay. If that wasn't working because there was stuff behind him, you could actually manually kind of select him. But see, zoomed out this way, I'm already kind of, you can't really see. Let me zoom in here. Let me zoom in. You can kind of see I already missed the mark here. There's this white little thing, and that'll turn into a border, so that doesn't look all that great. Control D is what I'm hitting there. And then these are straight up selections like squares and circles and stuff like that. That's not going to help us. So the one that I usually use is the quick selection or the magic wand. The magic wand will select any light color. So you see it got most of the white, but it kind of missed this darker area that's very subtly darker. And then it kind of comes in on his fingers because that's a very light color too. So it's not perfect. The one that I use a lot is the quick selection tool. So basically, if you select an area and kind of click and hold, it tries to select everything that's of like color. So I'm just kind of going around his whole body. I'm holding down as I click. Did a pretty good job except for the fingers here. So if you zoom in and you use hold Alt while you click, it deselects an area. And see, it's still kind of missing the area around his finger there. Now when I do that, it kind of misses the area in between, and so it's not getting it perfect. So I'm going to show you a trick that I do on a lot of photos where there's lighter parts of the costume. Basically, if you get this layer and you drag it to the one right next to the trash can, which is a new layer icon, I'm creating a new layer. I'm creating a background. So what I'll usually do is, first off, let's deselect it. We can come back. We'll reselect everything. That's fine. I'm on this background layer, and what I'll do is I'll go up to the image adjustments and levels. You can also get there by hitting Control L, by the way. And I'm going to take this leftmost slider on the input levels and kind of pull it in. And what it's doing, you can see it's making everything a lot darker. So if I zoom out here, you know, you're starting to see the footprints come up, his shadow's getting darker. But usually the effect that I go for is, if I get this magic wand tool again, usually, see, it did a little bit better job of deselecting his hand there. So now I'm a lot closer. Oops. A little bit closer. There's a little bit there that's still not coming out the way I want it to, so sometimes what I'll do is I'll get the magic wand tool, I'll hold shift and see if that does a better job, and sure enough it kind of did. So at this point I can delete this layer if I want to. I'll come back to the background layer and then I'll delete that. No, just delete it. And now it's selecting on the background layer. And then I'll just finish out my selection with the quick select tool. Just holding down click there. So it's cool that the lightsaber kind of gets deselect or selected. That's fine. All this stuff here, that's all really good. It's right up against the shoe. There is one thing, sometimes you got to look for these little areas in between, right between his pants, that doesn't get selected. So I'll just click in there and that gets it. Oops. And see, that happens sometimes. It already went back and it reselected his fingers, or deselected his fingers. So Alt again, very carefully. I'll just have to clean that up, my hand, which is actually a good lesson to be taught, so that's fine. It can get a little tricky sometimes. See, it's like that got deselected because I went back in history. I kind of undid. So this area around his hand isn't going to be 100% perfect, but I can clean that up manually, and I'll show you how to do that in a bit. But basically, you want to have all of him. It's actually selecting everything but him, and we want to select just him. So the way you do that, if you hit Control Shift I, you can also get there by going to select inverse. So I hit Control Shift I, and so that went from selecting all of him, all of the background, to all of him. So now if I have this layer selected, all of him selected, see this icon down here in this bar, if you can see my cursor, I've heard someone refer to it as looks like a Japanese flag. It's got the little circle. This is the mask tool, right? I think if I hover over it right, it would actually say what it is, but I call it you're add a mask, and if you click on it, watch what happens. Now he is cut out from his background. This checkerboard means that there's nothing there. So if I add a layer real quick, and I like to do this just to check, and let's get an arbitrary color, like I don't know, like this dark red here. Fill tool. We can see that he's cut out pretty darn well. We zoom in here, and we already noticed some stuff about the hand. Now, why did I use the mask tool instead of erasing the area around him? That's what I used to do before I knew any better. Now I know better, and so I use a mask tool. Now, what a mask tool allows you to do, if you look at it, so here's him, and here's, so that this part is the actual image, and this is the mask. So everything that is black is invisible. Everything that is white is visible. So basically, you're able to get a brush here, any shape of brush that you want. I'm going to make this brush really small, and I'm going to make it have a hardness of 100%, and then, yeah, really small. And if we zoom into his hand, we'll notice, look right here, see how the red is shining through? that part actually got selected and then masked out. So if I go in and I'm hitting X right here, because I have black and white as my two colors. Black is my foreground color, and white is my background color. If you hit X, that actually switches them. So now I'm using a white brush. Anything that you paint white, as you see, that line starts to disappear. Yeah, because I'm painting it back in. Now my flow and opacity are kind of low, so I'm going to raise those up to 100%. And I can kind of refill in what got erased accidentally. And if we go up here, I hit just paint in, so some of his nail got cut off right there, right? And then if I hit X to switch to black, I can very carefully just paint out. Like, and now again the question is, well, why don't you could do this with an eraser tool, right? Yes, you could, but the problem is anything I erase, let's say I was erasing, right, and I would oops, and you missed it. If you went too far and you got past the point where your history can undo to, there's nothing I can do about that. I'd have to like kind of maybe clone it or paint it in. Once it's gone and you go far enough in your undo history, you can't get that back. So I accidentally erased that. All I got to do is change back to the white tool and I can paint it back in, right? This might be a good time to go ahead and save. So let's do that. So I'm going to just save real quick into save as. Actually, I'm going to go to my desktop. I have this folder that kind of has everything that I'm working on. We'll call this is it Marka? I'm already forgetting. And we'll just save that, just so I won't mess anything up. So we got to fix this other fingernail here. We're just going to trace around it with the black again. Now this was a dark color. I'm kind of surprised it didn't key out a little better, but it's just kind of the way those tools work sometimes. They can be a little finicky, and it was just probably easier for me to trace that in. So other than that, we can kind of see that there's a slight, if you get in close, there's a little bit of the border where the chromatic aberration, that's not a defect in the lens, but it's just an effect that happens with certain lenses. So there's a kind of a bluish color, and that led to a little bit of the blue and then a white background. So what you can do to get rid of that slight little, not halo, but little fuzz around the corners, is if you hold down Control and click on the mask layer, it actually selects everything, selects your initial selection again. So what I like to do is if I go to select menu and go to modify and contract, I'm going to actually bring it in a few pixels. I'm just going to go in 3 pixels. If you take that and then invert that selection, I'm selecting everything but. So basically, since only what happens when you create a selection is you can only erase what is selected. He is not selected right now. So if I have this black paint and I try to paint on him, see, nothing happens. I can't do anything. But if I make my brush a lot bigger, usually I'll make it like, that's too big. Yeah, like that. Ooh, that's still too big. I don't know, maybe like that. Okay. And we'll zoom in here to this part that kind of had that. See how it's brought in a little bit? And let me pull it down a little bit so we can actually see the brush. See how it's brought in? If I get in really close, the mask is over here, and that fuzzy area is outside of the mask. So if I get my black brush and paint over it, whoop, all that fuzziness just disappears. And if you get a really big brush, let's get a really big brush. Yeah, 1000's good. And we go all around the edges real quick. Make sure you've got this selected, because the worst thing is if you have this selected, you'll actually add black to the image, and you'll have like a black outline, which could be cool depending on the effect you're going for, but that's not what you want to do. We want to erase those extra little fuzzies around there. You have to be careful with hair and stuff. Sometimes it can erase little pieces of hair doing this method, so hair is very tricky. I have a special method for that I'll probably do a video just about that. So really only one time was all I needed. I've been tracing over as I'm talking, but whatever. So I'm gonna undo my selection, And then if you look at it, now he's very cleanly cut out. There's no little border around the photo at all, with the exception of right here by his shoe. And I'm not going to even worry about that for now. I'll wait till we start transposing him onto a background. So that looks good. He's cut out really good. I don't see any area that, to me, looks really fuzzy or anything like that. So let's start adding the backgrounds. The first background that I want to mess with is this kind of temple-y one, because that one's going to take some cutting out. So what I do is I have everything in a folder, usually everything downloaded that I download from the stock images site, and all you got to do is drop it in there. Now, this is what I talked about, resolution size. The resolution of this image is pretty close to the resolution of the actual photograph. So you gotta double click to actually place it, and then I'm gonna drag it. These are your layers that I was talking about. So the background layer is this red one that, you know, we don't actually need it. I'm just gonna erase it. That just allowed me to see him, how well he was cut out or how well he wasn't cut out, basically. So I'm going to drag this layer just by clicking and holding it and putting it behind him. So now he's already kind of on this cool background, which it looks pretty decent just by itself. But the truth is I've already used this for an edit, so I don't want to kind of duplicate that exact same look. So one thing is that we have this as a smart object, which is fine. There's a lot of cool things you can do with a smart object, but I'm going to need to do some manipulation of the background colors and stuff like that, the hue. So I'm going to go ahead and right click on it and rasterize this layer. You don't need to do that in all cases, but it's just going to be easier for me. So since this has been used before and I want it to look a little different, I'm going to get my selection tool, or what is this tool? I don't know. It's the cross tool, move tool. Okay. Get my move tool. I'm going to hit Control T and then right click on the image, and it'll allow me to flip it horizontally. Flip horizontal. And so now it's kind of the inverse of what it usually is. So that might make it look a little different, but I don't like the way that's lining up, so I'm just going to keep it the way it was. I'm hitting Control Alt Z to go back in history. Control Z will undo like most programs, but Control Alt Z will actually go back in history, so you can undo several steps, and you can actually adjust how many steps you can go back in the settings of Photoshop. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to kind of zoom in to this part, move that down, and maybe put it like about there, like that. That looks kind of cool. So now we're kind of zooming in on just one particular piece, and I'm going to move this down a lot, probably like about there, because I want some of the background to show up. Okay, maybe like there. Okay, so we got that going on, and I want to cut out, let me turn my red back on. I want to cut out this from its background, so I'm going to use this same quick selection tool. Don't be afraid that it selected him, because remember, you can actually turn this off. That's what these eyes do, by the way. They turn off layers. So if you need to look at one particular layer, you can turn him off so we can see it better. I'm going to add this selection here, this selection here. Oops. This is a little bit sloppier than I'd like it to be, but again, you can hit Alt and kind of get some of your stuff back if it's going a little too far. Well, this column here, it's deselecting it. There we go. Okay. I don't know if it'll be able to get these really tiny little shapes there. For the most part, that's good. That's going to probably be good enough to select what we want. And so again, inverse, Control Shift I, and then hit the mask tool. And so yeah, again, we have that halo-y look. So I'm just going to Control click on the mask. It's pretty prevalent, so I'm going to modify contract and go about, let's do 6 pixels this time. get my black brush and go, oops. See, that's what happens if you don't inverse. Control Shift I again. And we'll just go around the edge here. And that should clean it up a bit. Let's take a look. There's still a little bit, but that's going to kind of work with what I've got going on, I think. I don't think that's going to be that big a deal. Again, like I said, I test everything out. If it doesn't look exactly the way I want it to, well, I can go back and kind of adjust things. Now, he's kind of floating here. He doesn't really look like he fits. He looks a little too big for these stairs here. I don't want him on this floor base. It doesn't really fit with his feet and stuff like that, so I'm not too worried about how that looks. We're going to replace this. What I am worried about, if you look carefully here, you know, this red is bugging me. I'm going to turn it to black because that's kind of closer to what will be in the background. So let me just, oops, I did the exact same color. There you go, black. What is bothering me about this part, this image, is this line. See, it was kind of like a dig site, and it was kind of roped off, I guess. I don't like that, and that might show depending on where I place the foreground. So what I have selected here is the image, not the mask, the image on the left. And if you grab this little, what it looks like a band-aid, that's the heal tool. And I have to make sure that I rasterize, oops. So this is what you can do in a smart object. I can't rasterize a layer because then it would apply the mask to it, and I don't want to do that. So I'm going to actually go to the smart object here. I'm going to get my heal brush and kind of bring it in a little bit, and I'm just going to trace over that. And this is context aware, so basically it's going to take a little bit. It kind of uses the area around it to what's the word I'm looking for? Well, what it did is it made it disappear. The heal brush is really cool when you're doing like portrait photography and maybe someone has a blemish. You can actually use it to kind of make it disappear. It kind of uses the area around it and kind of equalizes the image. And you get in really close, you could probably see little areas. Now I did a really good job. Like, you can't even see that line. See, here's a part that I missed right here. So let me go over that. It's like it never happened. It's really cool. So since I did that there, if I hit X, it's gonna save the changes. Yeah, that line is gone now, and just because that might have been in the shot and I didn't want that there. So the next thing is, like I said, I don't like this flooring. I kind of want him to be maybe on this rock that's in the foreground, and this is the middle ground, and then we'll have a background of lava and stuff, and then hopefully be able to cut out from there and kind of put like a spacey star background behind him. Alright, so let's go on to the next part of this. We want the rock that I got here. It's going to need to be a little bigger, of course. Even bigger. There you go. Wondering maybe if I flip it this way, that looks, oh yeah, it looks a lot better. And I might have to move him down a little bit. I'm hitting double click to place it. You notice too, like the rock color doesn't match. It's like this weird gray color and everything else is red. That's okay. We can fix that later. We just want to make sure it looks like, okay, it fits. Now this rock is perfect because it looks like the slope almost fits the way he put his feet. I was kind of at a higher angle, and he put his foot back. So that's what makes the foot look like it's kind of higher, like he's stepping on something where the back is higher than the front. And that works perfectly with this rock image that we have here. I'm going to move it down just a tiny bit so he's not on that crack. And that looks almost perfect. But of course we have this white background. Now we're just going to do what we've done with everything else. We're going to select the white here. All of it there. Control Shift I. Give it a mask. And I'm going to go and rasterize. Oops. Let's do that the right way. So normally, what I do is if I'm going to rasterize a layer, I do it ahead of time because I'm not going to mess with a smart object this time. So let's just go ahead and rasterize this layer. Right click, rasterize layer. Now we can do our selection. Control Shift I. Mask it. And he is cut out. And like I said, if this really bothers you that this is not the same color, we can go ahead and fix that now. Roundabout anyway. If you go to Image, Adjustment, Hue Saturation, you can kind of mess with the hue here. Let's see if we can kind of get it like a kind of brownish color. See, and it's only doing some of the colors. Yeah, it's like a red. Yeah, it's kind of close. That's kind of red. And you turn up the saturation. It's not exactly what we want. If you colorize it, yeah, it's like the whole thing right there. So that, and we'll turn up the saturation, turn down the darkness. You can kind of look at the different color options, what looks best. Maybe this kind of desaturated. It doesn't have to match perfectly at this point. If you can get it kind of close, that's the most important part. And that looks kind of close. There, that's pretty close. And we'll just hit OK. So now the colors are a little close to matching. This is like a darker color, but that's okay. This will work for now. Okay, so we have two components. We have our foreground, or three components. We have foreground, we have our character, we have our middle ground. The next thing I want is to kind of put some lava in the background. Now, this is going to be interesting because the lava picture that I have doesn't exactly look like how I want it to look. See, some of the smoke kind of fades off here, but I think it'll work for what I want to do. So, same thing. I'm just going to drag this into our Photoshop file. It's a good time to save, by the way. Well, first I have to place this. So let me make it as big as I think it's going to need to be. Probably like that. Maybe like that. Okay, that looks kind of cool. And then we're going to place it in between the rock, or in between the ruins layer and the back black layer. That looks pretty good, actually. So it's kind of funny the way this is flowing. The angle isn't quite perfect, but I don't think too many people would be asking questions on it. I think it looks good enough. What might help is if I had some rocks. Oh, yeah, I might do that. Let's try to do that. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Of course, there's a hard cut here, and we still want the spacey background behind it, but it's going to be close enough to what we want. Maybe like, yeah, like that. This will work. So I'm gonna go ahead and save, just so I won't lose anything. Okay. We even have some embers coming up here, which we're going to add some embers in front of him too, just to make it look cool. And what I'm going to do too is I'm going to duplicate this rock here. Okay, move it around. I'm going to shrink it down a little bit, and right click, flip horizontal, and I'm going to move it in between the layer of the ruins and the lava. And then I'm going to darken it up a little bit by going to Image, Adjustments, Hue Saturation, Lightness, desaturate it a little bit, and resaturate it a little bit, and then kind of move it down here. So now there's kind of like a rocky background, and I don't think, hopefully no one would be able to tell that it's the same rock. Let's move it down like that. I just kind of want it to seem like the lava is flowing maybe down into a crevasse or something like that, and it makes a little more sense. So I see a lot of things that already kind of aren't working. We have this weird kind of halo. You can't really see it. Fuzziness around the temple. Hopefully we can kind of fix. We have this hard cut right here where the image ends. That's okay. We're going to be able to fix that. And also that's where we would have our spacey background. So we're going to want to kind of fade into that spacey background. So let's do that next. Nope, that's my reference thing. Here's the spacey background that I want. I'm going to just drag it into this, and now this is the background most layer. We got a little guy standing there, but that's okay. That's not going to mess with anything. I'm going to kind of ramp it up a little bit. Kind of put it maybe like around there. And we're going to drag it all the way behind the lava. So we kind of see how it's cut off here. And that's not a big deal. There's two ways we can go about doing this. We can actually move it up one layer. And we can try different transfer modes. So what transfer modes do is they kind of they change the way that the layer appears over the other layer. And I'm sure there's meanings behind this, but they're pretty self-explanatory. So multiply, for example, so you can see some of the stars. So there's some kind of equation in there. I don't know what they all mean. I know what they do, and it's hard to describe, but basically you can kind of just thumb through these. So I have this selected, and I'm just going to kind of like go down, right? And I can kind of look at different. So this one's kind of close. It's kind of close to what I want. There's still this hard line right here, but you can see how the stars are kind of shining through. That one's kind of close as well. You can see if there's any that already kind of look like what you want it to look like. And there really kind of is. But I don't know if that's quite going to be the effect that I want. So that would be one way. If any of those worked, you could use that method. But I'm going to drop it back here. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and rasterize this layer. I might need to make some changes to it. I'm going to drop a mask on it. I don't have anything selected at this point. So I'm just going to drop a mask on it. And with a big black brush, all I'm going to do is I'm going to change this hardness to 0. And I'm going to change the opacity to like 60 and the flow to like 60. So with this big brush, if I start to kind of go in there, and see how it kind of erases that hard edge. Now, I don't know if I like how the gradient is. Like I said, it's all about kind of experimenting. I'm going to pick a really big brush. So let's look at this. And yeah, I think I could probably live with that. Maybe. I don't know. What looks better? To me, that looks okay, but I don't know if I like it. What I'm doing here again is I'm taking the mask and I'm dragging it down and deleting it, and I don't want to apply it. So let's go back, switch the layers up. I think the lighten kind of did what I wanted. And there's a couple ways we can go about getting rid of this hard edge here. We can do the same thing, apply the mask, get a smaller brush, so too small. 2000, zoom out, and kind of just until that line goes away softly. See, I like that a lot better. I think that looks a lot better. Now what about this kind of glow around here? Well, it works because this would glow due to the lava, so I think we can kind of leave that as it is. I think that works. What might help a little bit is, let's see what happens if we kind of color in. Oops, that's a huge brush. If we color back in some of this area. So I'm going to actually get the white brush onto this mask layer of the ruins. And if I kind of color back that stuff here, it kind of looks like there's something like really hot behind it. Even up here. Because that little guy is kind of shining through. So it kind of looks like there might be some kind of crazy explosion behind him. So I kind of like the way that looks. And maybe make the brush a little bigger here. Maybe kind of, oops. No, I think that, I'm going to select this again and get a little bit of the black there. So all I did is just one hit of the black brush, so that way it's not so prominent. You can start seeing the stars kind of coming back through. So far I'm pretty happy with this. A couple things that you could do if you wanted to is add varying layers of, oops, sorry about hitting the microphone. Add varying layers of focus. So this ruins layer, it's already kind of a little out of focus in comparison with him and the rock, and that's cool. But then this goes back to being really sharp. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select that layer, make sure that you have the actual, not the mask, but this selected, and I'm going to go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and woo, it's set up really high. Let's do it at about, maybe about 2 point, let's go 2. And so that adds a little blur, and then I'm going to go to the lava layer and go to blur, Gaussian blur, turn that up to maybe 2.5. And I saw something kind of show up now that I did that, to figure out what that is. And then the last thing would be the stars layer would be the most blurred out. And so I will go to, again, Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and maybe give that a 3. And just so he's more in focus and the background's a little blurred out. I'm seeing this line here, and that happens sometimes because that could be the end bottom of this this top layer here. I'm pretty sure it is, and you can figure out what it is by turning stuff on and off. So see, I turn that on and off and it's not that. Turn the lava on and off and it's not that. Oh, it's probably this rock here. Yep, it's the rock. So that just means that there's a little bit that didn't get keyed out. So I'm just going to get a black brush here. Yep. So this is looking pretty good so far. We just have one major element that we need. And you know what? This is looking kind of weird here. So I'm going to kind of reselect these. Now zooming out, I kind of don't like the way that it looks. So we go here, 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 that one there, and I'm just going to kind of come back in with a white brush. Oh, sorry, black brush, and really tone those down a lot. Oop, I can't do that one because that guy's there. Actually, I can, and I'll show you how I can. Let's see. Does that look better? Yeah, it looks a lot better. So that guy's back in the background there. See, if we turned off this, you can see him kind of stand there. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to cheat again with this. No, we can't because I didn't rasterize that layer. So we double click on it here, and we'll just use the heel brush over him. See what that does. There we go. And it's kind of duplicating the stars behind him. There we go. He's out of the picture now. Sure, save that up. Now he's gone. Forever. And he's not in the picture anymore. So, a couple things I want to do here is, before we move on to adding the lightsaber, that'll be one of the last things we'll do, is we need to kind of add some shine to some stuff. So I'm going to select a color using the eyedropper tool in this really hot white kind of color. And I want to select these different layers here. Let's start with the ruins. So I'm selecting, control clicking on the layer, and I'm going to put something on top here, on the very top here. Let me go ahead and name it. We'll call it shine. Okay. And basically I'm just going to get a really big brush. Well, not that big, maybe actually a smaller brush, like 180 or 240. And it's white, that white color. And kind of come into the edges, all right here. All I'm trying to do is kind of lighten up the edge, because what would happen, oops, and for this I'll use an eraser to kind of tone down what I did. But if I remove this, you see how we kind of start getting that light edge? Because if there was a lot of light coming in through right here, it would reflect on surfaces. It might not be perfect. Oops. So just hit E. I'm going to kind of erase anything that I don't like the way it came out. So it's just kind of highlighting those edges. You can also lower the opacity. Yeah, see, that looks pretty good. I'm going to do the same thing with this rock in the foreground. I'm going to select, where is it? There it is. And just kind of go over it with the brush. Make sure I'm on that shine layer. Some of it seems to be shining through a little bit, so I'm gonna erase it because this layer's on top, of course. So let me make sure get that edge there. And then lastly, I want the big rock in the foreground to have a little bit of white on it as well. First instinct, just kind of go in there. Select him. And he's going to need some shine too, but we're going to wait on most of that. We're going to have to drag this to the layer on top of him. Need some there. Some there. A little bit, because we're going to actually come back with another different color. And anywhere that kind of overlapped on him, we need to erase that. And just kind of get in there a little closer. You can also achieve this by using a smaller brush as well. Make it taper off there at the end. And not so prominent up here. Make sure this is, we got the hard line with the temple there. You can leave that the way it is. Okay. So yeah, that looks pretty good. There's a little bit right here that looks kind of funky. So let me come back with the eraser. Take care of that. There we go. That looks a lot better. Okay. So far, so good. The last element that we're going to draw in here before we do some of the final things is let's draw on the lightsaber. I have these created, and usually I would just drag it in to not duplicate effort, but I want to show you guys how to do it. So I'm going to create a new layer. We call it blade. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go here to see where this little caret thing is. If you click it and hold it, you're going to get the pin tool. And what that will do is create a shape. So I created a dot down here. I'm going to hold shift. And what would it be like? This blade's a little crooked. That's okay. I'm going to create a point right here. And then another one right here. And then here. That's okay if they don't quite line up in there. So what we're trying to do is get the shape of a lightsaber. And where is that? There it is. This little white select direct selection tool is what I want. And so I'm going to take this point, hold shift and get this point and kind of drag it out here. We're trying to create a straight shape. But he has his blade a little tilted, so we'll have to kind of rotate it here in a little bit. We kind of see the tip of the blade there, so I'm going to select that and that. And that's pretty good so far. So now if I hold here on the pin again, I'm clicking and holding, by the way. I'm going to get convert point tool. If you click that, see how these, I can actually round these out a little bit. These little control points come out. I'm going to round out the blade, and I'm going to round out the blade down here as well. You have to be careful because it's kind of bringing that in, and I just want this point right here. So if I click this now, if I right click on here with the black path selection one, there's an option here. I believe it's fill path, and it uses a foreground color to kind of create a shape from this. Now if we zoom out, the lightsaber is not perfectly lined up. It's his blade, hard to show it, but his blade is kind of going off to the side here. So all I'm going to do is use this move tool, and I'm clicking where I see these little, I don't know, it's like a U-shaped arrow. And what you can do to get it lined up is kind of put it down here in the hilt and make it line up with the hilt. And maybe like that. So that's perfectly, I got this path here, don't worry about that. Apply, and I'll shift it up. So we know it's at the right angle here, we just need it to be there. Okay. And I don't need these paths anymore, I can actually delete it. And there, it's a perfectly shaped blade. I think it needs to be a little bit longer, so I'm just going to pull it out a little bit and put it down. So we have the base of the blade here, just like that. Redrawn. Oops. What you can do too is, if his blade hadn't been erased, you can take the time to trace it out, so you'll have a reference of the angle and shape. When it's straight up and down like that, when it's a little off kilter, but when it's straight up and down, it's usually pretty easy. What I try to keep the reference for is if they're pointing the blade like directly at the camera or something like that. That's kind of hard to envision sometimes, so I'll make sure to leave those in if I can, for reference. But this one, it was straight up and down, so you could probably take care of it myself. So we have the white blade here. He's a Sith Lord, so I'm going to double click on this layer. It brings up the layer styles, and we're going to look at this outer glow here, and see it's kind of already green. That's cool, but he's a Sith, so we don't want green, we want red. Very red, all the way red. And it kind of looks like what it's supposed to look like. What you're going to mess with is the spread and the size. And I can't give you exact settings because it really depends on the resolution of your image, but you can just kind of mess with these. So I'm going to bring up the spread a little bit and bring up the size, and then, oh, that kind of looks good, right? So usually what I'll do is I'll do one, and then I'll duplicate the layer by dragging it and creating a new one. And see, it's even brighter, right? But what I'll come back here and do is maybe I'll put a blur on this layer. Gaussian blur. Big Gaussian blur. More blur. Maybe like that. Like that. And then I'll bring down the opacity of this layer a lot. If you don't like that either, if I click down and see, we can delete that. And the other thing you can do too is just mess with the outer glow settings and make them a little bigger the second time around. That can also give you a cool effect too. Then same thing, lower the opacity a little bit. But that's pretty decent right there. You have the red lightsaber going on pretty well there. So all the elements are in. There's just one last thing I want to do. So we got this red lightsaber going on. I'm going to go to the shine layer again. Select our Sith path. Control click on the mask layer. And I'm going to get it all the way red. And I'm going to kind of just a little bit of red here and here. A little bit on his hands. And a little bit, oops. Maybe a really small brush. We're gonna have to zoom in on this one, guys. A really small brush, and just kind of very carefully on his face. So I'll come back with the eraser tool here. It's huge. It's too small. Kind of erase this edge here. Because the light from the lightsaber would undoubtedly kind of reflect on him a little bit. So we want to kind of get that in there. Okay. Everything looks good so far. Now at this point, I'll do some overall image correction. So the first thing I usually apply is this one in between the folder and the layer mask is the adjustment layers. And I put those all at the top here. First one I usually do is a photo filter. He's in a very light, what do you call it? Lava-y planet. So I'm going to give it a very orange kind of filter. I'm going to turn it up a little bit. So that's giving everything kind of an orange glow, and it's kind of evening out some of these colors. Oh, I did forget something. I forgot something and I just realized. So we have light coming from here, right? He doesn't have any kind of shadow. So usually I'll create another layer right underneath the shine. I call it shadow. That's pretty straightforward how to do this. You get a brush, big, turn down the opacity a lot. Bigger than that, probably about there. And there's a lot of different ways you can do this, but usually I just do it by hand. I'm probably gonna have to create this brush a little smaller. And the light's coming from this way, so you know you want the shadow to go this way. Oops. I want it to be black though. And we're gonna kind of trace the foot, and then let me get a bigger brush here. And then just trace his body out. That's a pretty good shadow. And you make it darker, closer to him. Darker right there. If you even wanted to, you could come back here and maybe add a little more shadow to this side of him. Just gotta be careful with those fingers because it could look kind of funny. So I'll add a little bit of shadow here and here. Just so it's like the light source is here and he's over here. So there we go, we have his shadow. Okay, so back to the photo filter. That looks fine. The next thing I usually do is I'll add a curves. Kind of bring it up a little bit. And then I'll add a levels and bring the whole thing in a little. So now that really brings it together. Now it really looks pretty tight. See a couple things that I don't like on this shine layer. I'm going to get the eraser tool and kind of touch up this red and white. It's a little too, I don't know, prominent, so I'm just going to kind of bring that down in there. Same thing here, and I see this little edge of the shine that I don't like. Everything else looks good. So the last thing I usually do create a layer on the very top. And I'll usually name it, and just get a big, giant black brush. That's not giant. That's giant. And I'll kind of there you go. You'll kind of darken up the corners here. Those are already kind of dark. I think this brush is too huge. It's taking forever to use. And so I just kind of darken up the edges here. That way it kind of draws your photo. It's like a vignette kind of thing. And it kind of draws your attention to the character at hand. So everything looks really good. Oh, there is one thing I did want to do. I want to add some embers in because, well, there's lava. There would undoubtedly be, like, you know, ashy embers. So this is my embers. This will give me a good chance to show off the transfer modes as well. So there's a lot of embers there. And place it over everything, right? And we'll just go through the transfer modes one by one to see if there's one that kind of looks... Yeah, that's it. There's just too much, right? So we can... Let's rasterize the layer. Just to make things easier. Control T and flip it horizontally. And then pull it this way. That's good. And then what you can do too is just go ahead and place it, and let's throw a mask on there. And we can just, let me lower the size of that just a little bit. And we can just kind of erase some of these embers here. There's just too many of them. Especially the ones that go across him, because we kind of want to showcase him, and we don't want him to obscured by all these embers. Maybe there's, like, you know, yeah, let's get rid of some of those there. You play it by ear, see what looks good. But yeah, I like that. So that's good. Maybe one too many on his face there. Yeah, and maybe a few less here. That looks good. Okay, so, and this image is completed. Since I made a change, I will save it, and then I'll update my JPEG. But this is pretty much, this is a lot longer than I wanted it to be, but I'll probably try to see if I can edit some stuff down a little bit. But this is what photo editing it is. You know, I kind of took my time a little bit more because I was explaining things, but, you know, an edit like this would take about 45 minutes to an hour, just to get everything right. You can do things a lot faster. I've done edits in 15 minutes, 10 minutes, but if you rush yourself, well, it does reflect the amount of time you put into it. That's just the easiest way to say it. The quality will be reflected by the amount of time you put into an image. If you go really fast, it's not going to look so great. You take your time, it might look a little better. I like this one. I think it came out pretty cool. This is just my process. There's a lot of things that, you know, I probably could do better. You know, I'm always looking to improve, but hopefully, if you're, you know, I was kind of making the assumption that you might not have any background in this. Hopefully, kind of give you some ideas of at least where to start, what you need to look at getting to get into doing something like this. So this has been Justin Zuniga from Z Elements with my photo editing techniques, and I hope you enjoyed it. I know it was really long, and I apologize for that. I'll try to cut it down in post. And thanks a lot.